We got the chance to speak to Tyler MacIntyre, a prolific genre writer and director. Anyone who wants to be a writer director or who currently is and just wants to sharpen their skills, or anyone who's involved in the genre space at all, or is even curious about horror movie making. This is one of the most insightful interviews that you're ever going to listen to. At least, selfishly on my end, I learned so much from this interview that is going to impact me on the daily with how I go about my own daily routines and my processes. And he just saved me a shit ton of time. His focus on writing, especially Duke, was really surprising to me. How his process, even with revisions of getting an early table read together and then sending it off to his reps, it all makes sense in this whole like convoluted complexity of this industry. It cut through a lot of the bullshit. So incredibly insightful interview.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, obviously he was sort of someone that you brought in as the guest, whereas Jimmy was my first person. And it's just funny that like he's someone clearly that has a lot of different irons in the fire. He's accomplished a lot. I didn't know about him as much as you did, but I just watched one of the movies that he did, which was so cool. And getting to talk to him about how he did that, but then also he just, even though he's super accomplished, he's still writing spec scripts. He's always dipping his toes into different things. Maybe we are just gravitating towards people that are like that because that's what we put out, sort of, doing a lot of different things. But also we're just going, as we've talked about, up the ladder a bit more, and maybe everyone kind of does that. Once you go to a certain level, it's like everyone's kind of trying to see what gets them to their sweet spot, as he pointed out. So
people who are in that position are usually not so transparent with information and with advice and just insights into how to get to that next level. And this is definitely something you don't want to miss. He does not disappoint. Everyone, Tyler MacIntyre. We're absolutely honored today to be speaking with Tyler MacIntyre. He is the prolific director of films like Tragedy Girls, Patchwork, the episode of Into the Dark, Good Boy, and most recently VHS 99, which I've seen all of the VHSs. And for me, being at that West Coast premiere, it was one of the best experiences of my life. I think it's one of the most powerful VHS films that have come out. It's a lot of the times hard to get a bunch of directors together on a sort of cohesive vision. And so seeing 5 directors collaborate, put in their like 20-25 minute take on this concept was a really great thing to see. So welcome, Tyler.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course, man. We're definitely going to dig into your whole backstory, which I've heard some of, but I would be fascinated to dig into some of the details. Beforehand, though, I would love to kick things off with, I'm on the filmmaking side, especially, genre space. So at least for me, this is going to be incredibly insightful. When you're a filmmaker, I'd love to start things off with, when you're a filmmaker, you have to kind of create your own chaos. So every day you have to figure out like, okay, like, what am I going to do? What's the project that I'm going to take on? Where are my benchmarks of success? How am I going to keep myself busy? Are there certain disciplines or certain routines or certain things that you have in place that you found work really well for you?
May I ask, not to derail that, to hold that thought, I want to know, what is even your guys' dynamic? How do you guys?
Yeah, let's dig into that quickly.
I know nothing about this other than Tyler's a great filmmaker. I've seen a little bit of his
so interesting story. This guy named Aaron Webman, who I met through my sister, through something there, something happened in Austin. They met up and she connected me. And he actually was responsible for producing one of Tyler's earlier films. And
my first feature. Yeah,
that's it. And so Aaron was kind enough to link us up, and we then got a coffee. We just talked shop and genre and all that good stuff. And then Tyler introduced me to some of the people that he worked on his section in VHS on at a place called Beyond Fest, which is a festival that's really it's pretty significant in the genre space. It has a lot of the biggest premieres. It was the West Coast
Genre
premiere.
space, even meaning is that specifically horror, or is that just that as a specific genre?
Yeah, it's more like horror, sci-fi, even like action, a lot of like really anything except for like capital D drama, or like something that's like a pretty straight comedy.
But one of the most surreal moments for me was being in that audience and hearing Tyler introduce this film and talking about how he was in the audience like a few years back, just thinking about the day that he could then have a film premiere at that festival, and seeing that in real time, especially on my end, was one of the coolest things ever.
Oh, that's awesome, man. And you guys have just stayed in touch and stuff. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that was we haven't known each other that long, but it's been a few months, and it was good to kind of like meet kind of different, like kind of over the summer, and then it just kind of happened to be we were ramping up VHS at the time, and we had this epic kind of like first coffee that was real kind of fun, kind of diving into all sorts of like it was the type of thing you kind of like lose track of time, and then all of a sudden I was like, whoa, it's like 3 hours. I gotta get some stuff done today.
Yes,
but it was a lot of fun, and so yeah, we just stay in touch, and I've been really impressed with what you've been doing with your channel, and kind of all the content kind of coming up. I've been like telling people about it left, right, and center, and it's been awesome to see. And I'm always trying to kind of meet fellow filmmakers and everybody in the who is doing something interesting on the creative side. Like I kind of learned pretty early that it's most helpful to kind of like surround yourself with people who can't like help but do it all the time, just kind of that was a big thing that I kind of found was very helpful, is just there's a lot of people like in all sorts of industries that are kind of like know enough about to kind of like talk a good game, but not necessarily are not necessarily doing it like as actively as they could be. And that comes in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, obviously, and people have different reasons for being more or less prolific at different times. Sometimes people are waiting for the right thing, but I'm always very impressed by people who are always have many irons in the fire, and are always working towards something, no matter how big or small. And I think that's I think something I kind of liked immediately about Jacob was just the fact that he kind of seemed to have this very like you just kind of say yes attitude to the whole creative process, and where it might kind of take him.
I couldn't agree more. It means a lot hearing that from you. That type of mentality that you're talking about is rare. There are so many people out here who are like talking that big game, and they're like, I'm thinking about this script, and then like 5 years down the line, I'm thinking about this concept, and they don't ever deliver, because the amount of discipline that it does take to execute on something like that is tremendous. So, I mean, I can say the same. It's like surrounding yourself with people who share that level of mentality will only keep you sharp. It'll only keep you on your game, and just inspire you to just keep going. I'll also say too that this kind of like mentorship at all, I've been out here for 5-6 years, and it's rare, and I don't know what it is. And Tyler, I don't know if you've experienced something else, but you're obviously more plugged into the horror community than I am. But as far as like mentorships go, or even filmmakers talking with other filmmakers, for me, that type of experience has been few and far between. So it was like a breath of fresh air on my end to be able to talk to someone like you, who is a few years ahead, a few years down the line, who has more experience under your belt, to even be able to share that kind of experience.
May I say real quick as well? I just want to, like, for the people that are listening, tell what I kind of know Tyler from briefly, and then I want to hear your guys' like actual kind of understanding of everything. Because I humbly, Tyler, when Jacob told me that you were gonna do our podcast with us, I was so appreciative, and I looked up just the new VHS film that you did, VHS 99, I think it is.
Yeah,
literally. And I watched it on the new streamer Shudder, or I don't know how new that platform is.
Yeah, it's a few years old now. I don't think they're quite 10 years old, but they've been around for a bit, kind of building audience slowly.
Yeah, I noticed like even on Instagram they had like a cool just a cool thing going, and it's like a horror streamer, and it just seemed really like it was taking advantage of all the things that are kind of just kind of like surfacing right now, which is like, for one, kind of a aesthetic of like Stranger Things, like period, but like so much less wholesome, but like period piece kind of like horror, very, I want to say horror porn almost, like it's just super like slasher and fun and crazy, but also kind of like almost comedic and like very very just fun and everything. And I think that your movie, the most recent one that you were a part of, because it's an anthology series, it's also your movie in particular is like Black Mirror-esque in that anthology aspect, and then also Twilight Zone and all that stuff. But then, you know, so much more. First of all, I have so many comments to say about that, like so many great things I took away from it, but also like it just, I guess your movie, that movie was like a huge hit at Toronto Film Festival, right? And on Shudder.
Yeah, we were very fortunate in that it premiered at Toronto International Film Festival as part of the midnight lineup. And you know, being Canadian myself, I was, you know, really jazzed about that. And then we had a pretty, you know, good little festival run, because the movie it got premiered in the middle of September and then came out essentially like October 20th. So there wasn't like a lot, because we're trying to come out for Halloween. So there wasn't like a lot of time it could have, you know, played festivals, because sometimes, you know, you release a feature and for 6 months or even a year, it'll play different festivals all around the world. Whereas we knew we kind of had a more limited window. But yeah, it did quite well for Shudder. It was the biggest premiere they've ever had on the streamer, and it was the #1 movie on the AMC, which is kind of the parent company of Shudder. And so, yeah, we were, you know, really grateful that the fans kind of embraced it. And similar to how you're talking about you know, there is this, they do kind of really understand their fan base. Like they've done a very good job finding people to kind of curate their content. Like I know Colin Geddes was kind of one of the people in on the ground floor, and he actually used to be the programmer at Toronto Midnight, and he really is plugged in, kind of understanding where the kind of ebbs and flows of the genre space. And Peter Koplowski has been kind of you know, like continuing on that at TIFF for him. But they also, like in-house at Shudder, they have like Sam Zimmerman and a lot of these guys who really understand like what makes the horror community tick, and are kind of sourcing out you know, content not only to like license that exists and kind of keep this kind of rolling menu going for horror fans, but also starting to create original content, like you know, even things like Cursed Films or like the Creepshow series. A lot of their kind of originals are doing very well for them, and they're continually you know, punching above their weight class.
And just tapping into like what's kind of like materializing and just enhancing it more and more, it seems like, right?
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting you kind of touched on like the idea of like this kind of like sense of horror nostalgia that's going on, like the Stranger Things of it all, like the idea of that there's a kind of these sort of fundamental like gospels in genre, you know, that you know, people like, you know, things like Gremlins or The Exorcist or like, you know, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, like Halloween, you know, these sorts of kind of fundamental films that are considered like, you know, perfect and amazing, and are really kind of the building blocks of like where this genre went. And they really kind of understand that there's like this sort of self-reflexive like attitude to horror, and you know, they're cultivating that as well as, you know, finding new voices. And I think that's always kind of important.
It must be so exciting to be like a part of that, doing that. I know Jacob is like, you know, like knocking on the door, wants to, you know, like even just putting stuff out constantly is great. Yeah.
Well, I think that it's the several waves of excitement. It must be, right? Like from your end are, you know, obviously you have the wide release, you have the premieres, you have the festival run and all that kind of stuff. And something like this happens on Shudder, it's like all these waves of just like, wow, this is doing really well. This is getting even bigger. This is going to do some really cool things for my career.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because like, I mean, like VHS is a little bit different, like in that it's like, it's similar to a theatrical, or sorry, like a feature release, obviously, because it is a feature film. But since it's an anthology, you're kind of like on a team with a number of other directors, which is unusual. So like it's a good and a bad thing, like our I mean, I wouldn't even say bad thing. It's just the experience is kind of similar and different, because like the screenings are very similar in that they're a lot different than like a short film screening when you're part of a block, and and there's like a lot of when you go to a festival with a short film, it's a little bit distancing because you're like you're there and you're generally presented with a lot of other material or in the front of a feature, and the conversation is always about kind of the often about the other things. And if you're able to for short filmmakers, it's really important just to kind of go to the festivals and meet other filmmakers and try and make connections that way. Whereas with a feature film, like typically you're like an evening of entertainment, and there's a lot more resources often to kind of like bring you to a festival and like maybe put you up for a couple of days, and it's a little bit more of an experience where you're much more likely to kind of meet other people who have made films or got other films the festival made. And it's whereas but the cool thing about the VHS franchise is they have a very awesome legacy of like cultivating a lot of early careers of some great filmmakers. Like that original slate of people who made that first VHS movie are all like amazing. It's like the Radio Silence guys and Dave Bruckner and like you got Simon Barrett and like Joe Swanbergs and like the Ty West, like it's like all those guys in the, especially in the first, probably in those first two movies, or even I mean nothing against VHS Viral. I mean there's some great filmmakers in there too, but they have this kind of interesting like family of filmmakers that they've gotten over the years across the franchise. That everyone's kind of like, a lot of the kind of, really fun up and coming genre directors have all done like a version of it. So I felt really fortunate to be asked to do one.
It's like a rite of passage in a way as a genre filmmaker.
Totally. And I mean, this is, it's nothing new either. Like, I mean, there's, I mean, they're all found footage films, which is kind of fun, but like, you look at back in the 80s, there was, you got the creep shows and you got the, like, you've got, like the Twilight Zone movie and stuff like that, where you have, filmmakers who kind of, did a segment of an anthology, and it's kind of an interesting little sort of side pocket to a feature filmography.
While we're on VHS, and we'll move to more like generic kind of filmmakery questions, but I'm curious, like Pat McGee's design for Medusa was unreal. Can you talk a little bit about that collaboration and what that looked like?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, a lot of it. So Pat had worked on. He had built a creature prior to, or for one of the segments of the previous VHS or movies. They had done one for the Ratma segment of VHS 94 that Chloe Koenig directed, and that was a really interesting, like design, and I liked it, and I thought it was super interesting. And I think he actually did the Vampires and Ryan Prowse's segment as well. So I kind of was aware of his sort of design work and kind of had him in mind. And then when I got approached about VHS 99 and I started kind of coming up with the concept, and we knew we kind of had to build this Medusa character, then they were like, well, we're using Pat McGee again. And I was like, oh great, so I'd also seen some of his work. Like he does a lot of his bread and butter of kind of like day-to-day stuff. He does a lot of like Halloween Horror Nights and things like that, where they create like a lot of custom monsters that are done for like live experiences. And so he's made all sorts of different things, and he's been in the industry for years. And this, he's still, I think, kind of on the younger side of some of the effects guys working, but definitely has a lot of experience. And so I was excited to kind of chat with him, and I sort of threw a lot of I tend to make or pull a lot of references and things like that for different types, and there's some good examples of Medusas in previous films, but I wanted to do like what is the found footage version of that, and like what is the so we talked about maybe trying to do like where she was actually like a snake, like a snake tail, and and this whole thing, and we were like, that might be a little crazy, or like we weren't quite sure how it would work with the movement, and there would be much of a chase element, so we ended up kind of going like more like like bipedal and have like like more of a snake like kind of texture to it, and once we kind of circled around those sorts of elements, then we could work on like kind of making the practical version, and then figure out like what stuff we had to sort of supplement with the visual effects, which Justin Martinez sort of handled for us, and it was a cool collaboration because they really sent me this kind of preliminary design kind of based on the concept, and then it was just about like picking color palette and kind of like getting updates as you go, and it's really cool to see that sort of thing come together, because you get sent these like photos that are like, ooh, we sculpted this snake, and we sculpted this, like here's the teeth, and like you can kind of see it come together piece by piece, and then when they walk on set, you're like, whoa, and that's really my favorite part, is when you see people in full costume, because you're like, oh, that's the character.
There's
How long
something
did it
about-
take? Oh, sorry. How long did it take to do
Six-
production for that whole thing?
Oh god.
Yeah, I mean, we had a pretty short schedule. Our production was 2.5 days. So we had like 2 days and then kind of a half day that was, but like we sort of yeah, like it was a bit of a like we had a more compressed timeline because of like we're kind of tasked with being like what they call the wraparound, which is essentially like the segment that sort of tries to tie it all together, and they were trying to
Like
we've
20
spoken
pages too, right?
pardon.
It was probably like 20 pages of screenplay, right?
No, it wasn't that long. It was 13 pages or something. So like not super heavy days in terms of page count. It was
Yeah.
more just like the fact that we have this, 4 minute and 45-second long oneer at the end of it that has stunts and effects and a number of visual effects elements and things like that. And so windows breaking and Medusa's raging and all that effects
cool.
and so it was like I knew I needed to put most of my time into that, but I also knew that it was the style of it's kind of rough and tumble, so you don't have to be as precious about things that usually eat up time, like lighting and the camera was like a kind of a vintage camera. We shot on a high camera, and so it was actually from 1999. So
wasn't just the
kind of
effect.
had those elements in place. It was just kind of putting time where we thought it would do the most good, and thankfully we kind of cast it pretty carefully and end up with a really good group of kids. And
they were all good. They're all good throughout the whole movie, but yours in particular too. They looked really perfect. All the period stuff was perfect, and everyone was like not just natural but poignant and just captured the tone and the reality. And it was a really good job at playing this kind of extreme, ridiculous scenario really well. And the casting was even the little brother just felt so like perfect for that and everything.
Yeah, Ethan Pogue. Yeah, he was super fun. Yeah, and it was kind of funny because you'd see the kind of cast dynamics. Like they started to kind of like big brother him a little bit, like they were doing this thing where they'd like kind of like huddle before a take and stuff like that, and they were like excluding him from that, like until like we were ready to go for the big one, and they were like, "Come on, get in here," like, and it was like trying to. I mean, they're just playing games, and they gelled really well.
Was there a little improv, or was it by the book?
Yeah. I mean, a little bit. I mean, I consider like I am not super precious about like the word for word dialogue. I'm more about people kind of getting the general flow of it. I would say as a director, I'm most micromanaging of pace. Just I think because I was an editor for a long time, and so as a result, like I tend to kind of during the rehearsal process, as we kind of see the actors kind of starting to run it, I start to kind of be like, well, let's springboard from here to here, and you try and kind of sort of nudge things, and then you look, once you compare the script that was written to the final cut, you're like, oh, it's actually like 95% of the way there. It's more on book than it feels, and that's really by design.
No, well done. Yeah.
The whole concept in of itself, it felt like taking a cold shower, which to me, it's like that kind of horror. It's like, it reminds me of like in The Shining, like when, like the whole like bathroom scene. It's like you're expecting something completely different, and then the rug's pulled out from under you. And I love that, like, I thought that you executed on that really nicely. Also, the VFX wise too, it's like there's something so unsettling about that hair and like the whole design of the thing. It reminded me of even like Mama, like the short of that. I don't know if you've seen that, but there was a lot of like
that short is incredible. If anyone hasn't checked that out, like I mean, there's a reason that they were like, this guy directed this 2-minute short. Give him a feature. Like it's because it's that good.
Yeah, 100%. I mean that brings me to one of my questions, which is like, the whole like David Sandberg era, and even with like the Mama short, there are examples, but they're few and far between, as far as like you have this short and then you're given the green light for an entire feature that's like millions of dollars.
I have kind of specific thoughts on that. Like
I would love to hear from you. Yeah.
That used to be like a real defined path, like that was for years. I mean, and I think partially because, like back in the day, you had like Steven Spielberg directed Amblin, like there was just a short, and then started he was already kind of, I think, working in television at the time he did that, and then got like Sugarland Express, and then got Jaws, and then got, became the best filmmaker has ever lived. like it kind of became this like kind of thing that you could kind of scrape together enough money to do. It would be, make a short film and then go and make a feature. And like, and you see that path kind of again and again, but it's become a lot less reliable kind of in the YouTube age. Like I think the template and kind of dream for a long time was like, I made a short film and then it got into Sundance or some like, big festival. And then somebody, was like, oh, we want you to make a feature that is similar in tone to this, if not a feature version of it. And, like a Bottle Racket, like Wes Anderson, like that was a short film that was like black and white. And people kind of started to game the system a little bit, in terms of just trying to like, well, I wrote my feature and then I did my short film version of it. Like you see like Whiplash was kind of like that. Like the short film version of it is literally like, which is an amazing movie. Like Johnny Simmons is great in it. He's like the Miles Teller part. And he's like almost every bit as good as Miles Teller is in that movie, but in a short, and J.K. Simmons is in it, and you're just like, this could have been the movie, it's totally the movie, and so there's a lot of
trailer is better than the movie, it's right.
Yeah. And to be honest, I kind of get it, because like I actually think that making short films is tougher than features, because it's a different skill set, or like definitely for me it's tougher, because like I'm much more of a marathon guy, not so much the 100-meter dash, and like it's and I will never run either of those, I'm sure, but physically, but I'm saying like metaphorically, essentially there is no chance to course correct when you're making a short, really. I mean, and so like if you do make a short that is long enough where you can like, say you're shooting 6 days or something, and it's like a 20-minute, thesis film, then those movies are often not great, once shorts get to a certain length, people kind of are less interested in them. Whereas like they're very programmable at like, 10 or less minutes. And so, yeah, I think it's actually really difficult, because you need like a bulletproof idea that is executed, magically. And often people will like put a bunch of resources into things. And then even if the idea is a B, like it's never going to be a great short film, because it's really, whereas like when you're doing a feature, it's a bit like, it's a much longer like war of attrition. And like once you kind of figure out what the movie is, and I mean like, in the middle of shooting it, it's going to hit you. Then you have time to kind of then implement that, and then on the aggregate, your film becomes something else. And I think that is important to kind of realize is that I think it's actually easier to make a good feature film than it is a good short film, just from a crafts perspective. But it is so much harder to get a feature going than a short film, and that's what is kind of weeds people out, and that's where you kind of have that rub. Anyway, but just back to like the idea of breaking in and what now short films are really tough to and so it's become this, like, I would say that prior to a couple of years ago, like really what was happening is the marketplace has kind of changed, and we started seeing a lot more what they call ultra lows, and those are movies that are made for usually it's about $250,000 or less. Whereas like, I mean, that's starting to become a low budget, whereas now like an ultra low is, really anything, where you didn't quite have a legal amount of money to make it, whereas, like if you were to have, 10 people on set for, like whatever, 12 days, and pay them all minimum wage, like there are people budgeting features at less than whatever that is, because, people are volunteering their time and then, cutting it for nothing, and posting it for nothing, and all these things, and the price point's kind of been driven down, and that's like good news and bad news. The bad news is that people are it's hard to make movies for that with no resources, but at the same time the barrier of entry is also kind of now sort of scattered, because it's all the same size once it's on the screen, and that's it kind of levels the playing field in a certain way, and especially that's what makes it kind of exciting for like genre filmmakers, like Jacob, is that like it's kind of a question of like how you do it, like, and everyone wants to see, or is still kind of excited to see that, like I went out in the woods with a couple friends of mine, and we like, what did we come back with, and that's been the same since Sam Raimi did it, or even before before that, when it was like Toby Hooper and like George Romero and Living Dead, like for 60 years, it's been like, that's kind of been a pretty reliable way to do it, is just trying to scrape together enough money to get something done, and then seeing how it turns out. And that's really the big roll of the dice of it.
May I ask? Sorry,
I just want to say real quick,
Yeah.
it's incredible hearing this from you now, Tyler, at this point of like where we're like, I've made like 100 shorts at this point, going like doing like the YouTube model of it, right?
Which is pretty crazy, just anyway.
Well, yeah, it's fucking nuts. Yeah. But I, you know, at this point, it's like we are really focusing on shifting to features. We have, you know, a few scripts in the works that we're really proud of, that will probably like, I'll probably have like 3 scripts that I feel are bulletproof maybe in the next like couple months. And so at this stage of like just hearing from you, like, yeah, that used to be the right model of doing the shorts thing, like 2016 probably era, where it's like, you know, you made this thing, and earlier with the whole ambulance stuff, but it's like thinking of it in terms of scraping money together. Do you feel like, yeah, again, like the ultra low budget, whatever, still probably like $250,000, but like, do you feel like the best move is to wait until you have a certain budget where it's like you're not sacrificing quality, or do you feel like you can make a quality genre film if it's the right idea with incredibly limited resources, and you should just go for that?
Yeah, I'm going to kind of backtrack on my my personal strategy. Like what I had to do, or like for a couple of years, I wrote essentially like a script that I really thought was, you know, I'd written, you know, probably a dozen scripts, and then I wrote one that people liked, like, you know, like everyone who read it was like, this is crazy, you know, awesome. Like, and like the quality of it. And that was a script called The Dissections, and it was quite dark. And they were kind of looking at that, and they were looking at the short films that I was making at the time, and they were much more like kind of heartfelt and like magical and like funny, and in a way that was like,
script.
Yeah, people were like, yeah, I'm not sure this really gels, like, or we don't see you really, you know, directing it. And so the idea was like, do I try and like, you know, we had a couple of options to maybe like try and sell it. And so I was like, nah, I think I just wanted to do something that would be, I'm gonna save this one, and then I'm gonna write something that is so small that I can try and make it. And that's you know, so I actually had made a short film that was called Patchwork, that was like a 1 minute, or well, sorry, actually, it was about 2 minutes long. That was essentially about this girl who, or you're kind of like seeing these little images of somebody sort of waking up, just kind of like details like fingers and eyeballs and stuff like that. And they're kind of, there's this monologue going on about this person being like drunk and kind of being like, oh, I'm so out of it. And then they go and look in themselves in the mirror, and they turn on the light, and it reveal that they're like this kind of female Frankenstein character with like a stitch running down there, and they have like, you know, a blue eye and a brown eye and like long hair on one side and short hair on the other side. And it was just, you know, they scream, and that's the whole short. And then people were like, ooh, and that was my attempt to be like, look, like I wrote something that's similar to this, or sorry, I made something similar to this, this dark script I wrote. And they were like, ooh, can you make a feature out of that? You know, like, and I was like, sure, if you think that's a better idea, you know, I can, you know, I kind of got into it, you know. And so so in the process of fleshing that out with my writing partner Chris, it became a little bit lighter and kind of more like similar to stuff like Reanimator or Evil Dead 2, like a lot of those horror movies that I really loved growing up. And that and then actually Aaron Webman, who's a fellow who introduced Jacob and I, kind of came on as a producer and helped me kind of you know, source the resources to kind of put it together, and kind of you know, his brother Ethan was also one of the producers on it, and my best friend John Agaponis, and they were kind of like our producing team, and we all kind of worked together to kind of you know, get it all kind of done using, you know, beg, borrowing, and stealing as much stuff as we could. But you know, to answer your question about like whether or not it's better to make an ultra low, like that worked for me, you know, just because of the situation I was in. But I've also seen like a guy I went to school with, who horror fans would know, or maybe even non-horror fans would know, Ari Aster, who went to AFI with me. You know, like he after school, like didn't really do, like he kept making like really good quality short films, like, but not like super often, not like a Jacob amount of proliferation, but like every year or so he would make a really cool short film, and then was kind of like waiting for the right time to make his debut film, and it took him almost a decade, you know. And but when he did it, it was Hereditary, and that did amazing, you know. But he was waiting for the right amount of resources to kind of like you know, reveal himself to the world. And I think that's, that really worked for him. I've seen, but then, that said, I also know, like Parker Finn, who just did Smile, and he's a guy who made a lot of short films over the years, and is, and I met him a couple of years ago at a party, and he sent me some of the shorts, and they were awesome, and then, but he also had that, kind of, dream scenario where he'd been working so hard for 10 years, but then he made a short that happened to play South by Southwest, and it was actually the year that was closed down, so it got kind of forwarded around and got enough traction, and he got to make a feature out of it. And so it's not necessarily about like different models working or not working. I just don't think people should become too fixated on one ththing that may or may not be for them, and so like I think if you feel like you have the skills to kind of cobble together resources and make a low budget feature that would be creatively kind of similar to like what you want your voice to be, then you should go for it. Whereas if you feel like, no, I got to have the resources to do it right, then it might be a longer game, but that also could work for you as well. So whereas the short thing is much harder to predict. But yeah, either way, I think I'm always encouraging people to just keep making stuff. Like you should always be, in my opinion, running something or shooting something or in post on something at all times. And that's just the only way to, kind of keep busy.
Not being too fixated on a certain situation, I think is incredibly helpful, because at least for me, that's definitely tripped me up as far as like, this needs a certain budget range in order to kind of, but I think the power of intention of more being like, you know what, like, I don't really know how we're going to scrap together the minimum amount of doing this thing, but like, if I have the right intentionality and focus on whatever, it's like, we can see this to the finish line.
Yeah, for sure. And I think people get a little bit like, they kind of look at other people's like progress or kind of try and compare themselves to like people that they are like aspiring to be like, or and get a little bit in their head about decisions that they've made. Some people like so it's often a debate these days about like, do you or do you not try to go to college if you want to make it in the entertainment industry, or like how valuable is film school,
right?
And these sorts of things. And people have such a, the reality is, I mean, it's kind of, any choice is kind of what you make of it, it's just a question of trying to put yourself in a position where you can find the type of opportunities that you're comfortable with embracing.
Yeah. And like we talked about too, sorry, on a side note, kind of all the mediums have their trade-offs, pros and cons, short film, feature, TikTok, anything. And it's like you guys have just gone over, like if you can make it showcase your stuff, the best visibility, you have an audience, it's like you should be able to mold and match to different things.
Totally. And sometimes people people come at, I mean, a lot of people have a goal of becoming like directors, and things like that. But the reality is directors come from all sorts of backgrounds. Like, there's a lot of great actors who become directors, and there's people who come at it from like the performance, perspective, or people who've come from more of like a camera, visual place, like DPs or different departments. I'm really excited about, like people like Robert Eggers, did like the Witch and the Lighthouse, and like is more of like a production design kind of background, which is super interesting. And so it's interesting to see kind of those elements, like where people's skills are. Like Anna Biller did like the Love Witch, which is a super interesting movie. Like she has like more kind of more skills that are like kind of costume design type of skills, but is a great director. And so it's interesting to see. Like I think people kind of I think get a little distracted when they're doing things that are like or climbing like a part of the mountain that's not necessarily traditional. I mean, like, for myself, like I was an editor for a long time, or but that was more like I was always directing, kind of writing my own stuff, but like professionally I was kind of trying to support myself, or I was supporting myself as an editor. And that was just because it was much easier to, like, when you're hiring an editor, chances are things are financially okay at that point, there's also this kind of technical mystery to it, this alchemy that people don't 100% understand, which kind of moves into your advantage. Similar with like, lighting and, things like that, where people who don't understand it think it's magic, and it kind of gives you this kind of weird advantage. Whereas, even things whereas I think it's a lot harder to pursue things like directing just by itself, without some sort of like day job. And I think people are often kind of like put a little too much emphasis on that like point where it's like, no, I got to support myself doing this exact thing. Whereas like, I mean, for years, even after I made Tragedy Girls, like I was still, I would still take little jobs here and there, like editing little things, and because you gotta, the reality of money in, money out, like you have to, there's no shame in it. And a lot of, I mean, the biggest directors in the world, sneak off to direct commercials, people do it all the time, and it's, and I think there's just there's this kind of agreed upon lie within the industry that people just kind of don't do anything and then appear out of nowhere with this mastery of the form in their first thing. And the reality is no one talks about Edgar Wright's first movie. They talk about Shaun of the Dead, like, and like Shaun of the Dead is Edgar Wright's first movie, but it's not his first movie, and the guy directed, or even like Jordan Peele's, like obviously amazing, like, and people like, it's amazing. He just kind of jumped into this, and it's like, what are you talking about? I mean, the dude directed, 50 hours of television, like it's like, like it's great, Anyway,
were you always a big film guy? Was editing kind of to supplement that you wanted to be a filmmaker? What was sorry, I just cut off Jacob again, and I don't want to keep you for too long either, but I want to know what hooked you and like what your path was like in a brief or however long.
No, you got to cut Jacob off just to skip it.
That's a given.
What happens when you have two co-hosts? Go ahead.
Well, it's been interesting seeing you guys have this whole system of like, you raise your hand. It's like real formal. It's
kind of working though. It's kind of good, I think.
I dig it.
Want to jump in.
I dig it.
Yeah, I completely forgot the question. I'm sorry. I just
Jacob, I'll let you summarize it in a better way.
Basically, like, have you always been a film guy, getting to like the editing space and that kind of stuff? Is that, have you always wanted to go that direction? Kind of what was your journey like in that space?
Where do you see yourself going in the future too?
Yeah. I mean, like, I think, for me, like, initially it was like I kind of grew up sort of making like I used to draw a lot when I was a kid, and then eventually I started taking pictures, and then eventually I got my hands on a video camera and started making little videos on VHS and hi8, and then eventually those got a little bit bigger, and like I was always doing something kind of like that. I did a lot of improv,
Where are you from?
I'm from a town a little bit north of Calgary, and so I'm from Canada originally. And the weird thing is, like the biggest challenge for me back then was trying to convince my like people as well as myself that this was like a viable career. Like part of me was like, the reasonable part of my brain was just kind of like, people make a living in this industry. It's not like there's just like 30 people doing this. Like, it's not like I'm going to go to the Olympics, like where there's like such a, every 4 years, there's like two people who get to do it. There is a active, like, people who make a living doing this at all sorts of levels in many cities in North America. And so I was like, it's not that crazy. Like, it's bigger than some industries. But it's also, since it's artistic, and since there's like, especially in my town and my family, there wasn't like any good template of like people who had done this for a living. It took a while to convince like my parents and myself, so I actually ended up going to undergrad and doing a degree, like my undergrad in psychology, because I was like going to become a psychologist because my mom was a psychologist and I was kind of interested in that. And so but then I just ended up just making movies all the time, and then it was kind of like, well, I should really stop killing myself and just actually just kind of go do it. And then but I also still kind of had the mind of like, oh, I should probably, get an education at first. And so I ended up going to Toronto and going to Ryerson, which was called at the time, and did a master's in media production there. And it was just not a very good program at the time. It was very young, or the program was very new. And then so I ended up, it wasn't really what I was looking for. And so I ended up going to AFI, which is, kind of knowing that was like quite a financial investment. And was fortunate enough to, kind of be able to just barely scrape together enough like student loans to do that. And then kind of understanding that, like, if I go to doing that, then I can at least I can move back to Canada, become a full-time editor, and like be able to pay this off, in 10 years, was kind of my thinking. and then, but then if things work out, I'll be able to kind of maybe stay here and then transition eventually into writing and directing, which is kind of what happened. But yeah, that was, like I was always very interested in film, as you were kind of asking. I definitely watched a lot of movies, and I was interested in television, but not nearly as interested. Like I always really loved, I find that, like, for me, television, especially when I was a kid, was everyone watched like the classics, like The Simpsons and stuff like that. But all that stuff seemed like a little like it was fun, but it was a little frivolous, and I looked forward to it. But like it didn't really click with me. I wasn't like, oh, I want to make The Simpsons.
It wasn't your calling, yeah.
Yeah, whereas I really remember watching, like I may have mentioned Evil Dead 2 before, but I remember finding that movie and then being like, holy shit. I got to tell people about this. And you kind of you had to, it wasn't for everybody, it was like, but it was like, if your parents walked in, they'd be like, oh, what the hell crap is he watching? But then there was things in it that were like clever, and there was like a hand at work. And then you'd read about the stories on like the early days of the internet about these, crazy kids making this, and you kind of get like inspired, like, oh, people could just do that. Like these kids from Michigan did this, and you can kind of you start to internalize those sorts of things, and like Robert Rodriguez and that whole situation with where he made El Mariachi, for allegedly $7,000 or something that he got from like whatever his mythology is. And a lot of those kind of like get out there and do it. Independent film messages were very meaningful to me at the time, and that was something that really kind of, like in those days when YouTube didn't exist, was great to hear. And then as I got into college and YouTube started kind of like really pick up steam, it was kind of like, oh, we can make stuff and just kind of put it on the internet, and I was kind of right there when that was sort of happening. And I never really put too much emphasis in it, I think, because I was always more interested in like doing kind of like short films that were kind of trying out different hats of styles of features, and then writing features, hoping that I could eventually maybe make one. And that's was always kind of the goal. And then it's always just been kind of this continual process. And now I'm kind of circling back around where we, have been writing more things like, kind of with a television engine, and starting to kind of pitch things, and had some things set up around town on various fronts. But getting into like the game of the Hollywood machine is always a bit tough, but like a lot of my income these days is writing things and getting them set up at various places, because people will pay you decent amounts of money to not do things like, they'll, you can get a script set up, and then there's a whole system to support just to getting set up somewhere, and people telling you what it should and shouldn't be with no intention of ever making it. And that's like, it's this active kind of development process that is kind of fun to kind of get in the game with, but is quite different, because like as soon as like something's been shot, then it's a very different conversation. And that's what's kind of interesting, is because like you could spend your whole career trying to get things made and do quite well financially, but never actually get a movie film or made, and that's what I would caution people against, which goes back to trying to find people who are actively working or can't help but make things. Is that like, I like the screenplay format, but it's not a finished thing. Like, and people kind of get like, especially on Twitter, like screenwriters get like real bristly about things like talking about script as a blueprint for a film. I don't care what you say. That's really what it is. Like no one, like people don't really like the average person does not really read, does not really read a blueprint or a script for pleasure, but they will walk into a building and be able to enjoy it, and they will watch a movie and be able to enjoy it. And that's the similarity. And so you can't get too wrapped up in that. And I would encourage people to just keep making things that are like finished products, and not be afraid of making something that's not up to satisfactory standards. Because like I've learned more from movies that people hated than movies that people liked. Like if you make a movie and people are like, oh, it was great, you're just like, cool. So what? There's nothing to be learned from this, like, and whereas like every time a joke doesn't land, I'm like, why doesn't that work? And then you learn something from it. But you have to be kind of honest with yourself about that, and learning to take that feedback, I think, is really tough, because you're often early in your career are is very fragile. You're kind of putting yourself into it. It's all volunteer time, and it's something that's very hard to explain to other people who work in other industries, because people are like, well, you're working, shouldn't somebody be paying you for that? And it's just not really the way it works. Like, because there's no economic model to support any of that. But also, you're like, if that's, if you're not going to be able to learn what you need to learn to get to the point where you're supposed to be paid for it, like you do need to kind of like if you paid somebody minimum wage to write their first script, it would be not a script that was worth the money that you paid them. And that's because it's actually like a really high skill, paid. It's a really high paid thing, because it's really tough to do. And and so it's incredibly difficult to analyze the industry, or the entertainment industry, in terms of traditional, economics.
Yeah.
I love thinking in terms of like systems and habits and things, daily disciplines that you can do that are the most productive use of your time. So I'm curious as to, do you have any advice for beginning filmmakers, as far as like, even we already touched on shorts. If shorts aren't really the model nowadays, and it's more like, thinking about like, maybe you do make that premiere short and it leads to something, whatever, like everyone has their own path. But I'm curious as to like, are there any habits that you found for yourself that have led to the point that you're at today that you feel like were the most useful for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I used to have a really hard time getting started writing. Like I would, I would think about, like, I would come up with an idea, and I'd kind of think, I'd work on it enough that it was like, oh, that's going to work. That could be a movie. And then I would spend a long time kind of thinking about it, and then have these kind of fits and starts of like writing it.
Right.
And then so for me, the most helpful thing was I got this like right after school. I had this kind of period of time where I was working for Roger Corman, and I kind of sort of asked him. I was like, hey, what type of scripts are you guys buying or making? And he was like, well, we have this kind of deal with sci-fi, like Sci-Fi Channel, where they have like these monster movies, and he had kind of this very specific formula of like, the scripts are like 88 pages, and a monster needs to attack every 10 pages kind of thing. And it gave me this real specific outline of like what it needed to be or what the expectation was. And I remember, and that like fixed it for me. Because I like, once I figured that out, then I was like, oh, this is an outline. Like, this is I know where it starts, I know where it ends, I know, where things are supposed to go. And then I realized very quickly that, like, as long as I kill somebody every 10 pages, I can do anything I want. And so it was really, it was really freeing in the structure of it. And that was like, the first like script that I wrote that I was like quite happy with. And then it was much easier after that, kind of tipping at that point to kind of keep the momentum going. And then I started doing this thing where for years, since I was kind of working a day job as an editor, there was sort of the expectation that you're kind of available during regular work hours, which for an editor is like kind of like 9 to 6 or 7, at least. And so I started being like, trying to write in the evenings, and it wouldn't work because I'd be like sort of creatively fried. So I realized that, like, if I got up at 6 a.m. and wrote for 2 to 3 hours, then I could go to work at 9 and still put in a very similarly productive day.
Right.
But then when I got home, I'd already gotten my stuff done. So if I didn't get anything written, it was fine. And then the next day I would write a little bit more. And then I, after a month, you've gotten a lot of work done. And I so that became like my main go-to thing. And like my friend Arndt, who is also an editor who writes on the side, we would like meet up in the mornings at like either a coffee shop or his house or my house, and like write for 2 or 3 hours. And we did this for years. That's when I wrote Tragic Girls. That's when I wrote Patchwork. Like, I wrote a couple other scripts that we sold, and during this time. And I did that for years, and kind of became like a bit of a, like, much more of a morning person. But also it sort of taught me to be able to kind of like, oh, I have like a break from 2 to 5 during the day, and I could now get work done during that time. And that was quite valuable, because it meant that, like, I could write a little bit every day, and then you just get stuff done. Like, and if you don't have a rewrite that's pending, then you get a new script done, and just starting to kind of like get that, Stephen King advice of like, write every day or read a lot and write a lot, is like learning to do that, kind of made those like, years of kind of forcing myself to write really crappy scripts for,
Right. And I feel like by just getting
a lot more worth it.
you feel like by getting through those crappy scripts and just the more you write, just the naturally better you get at doing it, the better scripts you come out with.
Yeah, totally. And I do think like you really do need to write like at least 2 or 3 not good scripts, like, and you like, and like, like, I'm sure like people were like, it's my first script, like, I got this great idea. It's not a great idea. It will not be a good script, and that's okay. Like it doesn't need to be a good script. And then the second one is going to be a little bit better, but like not, and like my friend Chris had like he did this, faculty of extension, like UCLA screenwriting course, like, when he was still living in Canada, and they like had very similar advice to him about, that it's going to take you a couple, 2 or 3 scripts, and your third one's going to be okay, and then after that, they're going to start to be good, like, and it's like, it is true. And that's why it takes people, 10 years of work to kind of, because if you're writing scripts kind of like part-time, like on your, whenever you can, sometimes it'll take you 10 years to write 3 scripts, and then eventually one of them might turn out. And so I always find, like, since I started kind of writing little things, like when I was about 12 and was always writing short films, like, I think, I probably wrote way more shitty material than the average person, like, but,
Put it in. Yeah.
I mean, I'm relating so hard to everything that you're saying. That first script too, I feel like when you write it, you're so amped about it, and you do think that it is the greatest fucking script in the world. And it's like, it's never that. Yeah.
You should. Yeah, you should write it and make it the best thing that's ever been thought of, but then write another one and another one.
Yeah, and I do think there's this damaging, like kind of idea of like the Orson Welles of it all, like the myth of like, oh, like this guy is 26, showed up out of nowhere and made the best film of all time, and it was his first movie. No one, like, whereas like if you know much about Orson Welles, like, that he was a very prolific, well-known, successful Broadway director prior to that, who'd made some really historic, Broadway, runs, and also had like, the War of the Worlds thing, and like, a bunch of other, like, had already made waves, and was like in no way a new creative voice, just breaking in, like, and there's a reason he got that deal. There's a reason, like, and those are all things that, like, the narrative of it it's not sexy for the marketing of it, but it is like a huge amount of misinformation for people who, like, and I'm not really, a big proponent of like the 10,000 hours thing, but there's something to it. Like, you got to put the work in, and it's, there's no shame in it. And like, and I think, and in fact, I also think there's no way around it, really. Like, yeah.
The read a lot element of it that you mentioned with like Stephen King, I've heard the same. I read that book that he wrote like on writing, which is super helpful. But do you think that it is an essential piece of this as far as like improving your craft? Do you need to also read a shit ton of screenplays, or is it more so on the end of, I mean, it's really, like you're saying, it is a blueprint, and they are sometimes hard to get through. So I'm hoping you're going to say no.
I do read a lot of screenplays, usually because like for submission stuff, and I read a lot like that. But I read quite a few classic ones. I find it's a lot easier to read a script if you have seen the film, like, and there's some pretty good like classic examples of ones that, like the famous one, being like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, because like Len Goldman wrote like a book on screenwriting. That script's great, and so it's very easy to read and very literary, and especially if you know the movie. But then there's like, there's like, my favorites are like reading things that are not really like a script, but like kind of interesting to see. Like like the scriptment for Terminator, like James Cameron wrote, is so good. Like it's just like like just really interesting and super fun to see. But it has like all these little details in there that didn't make it into the movie because they cut them for budgetary reasons and things like that. And you can kind of see like, oh, like there's some really good stuff on the cutting room floor. And it's interesting to see that like this is also not really a traditional script. It's like kind of half a short story, half a, like half a script with some of the dialogue, and you kind of see that there's like, but like that, you could read that and totally understand what the film is. And it sort of helps kind of make you understand that there are no rules. And I like kind of thinking, like, I'm a big fan of kind of watching a movie, and if you find like sequences or scenes that you like, you're like, I wonder what that was like on the page. Go find the script and look at it. And even just doing that, like spending an afternoon doing that will teach you more than reading a bunch of scripts at random, I find. And I still do that even with, like, with new movies, like where I'll like, if I really loved a film, I'll read the script and or even just page through the script and kind of find the different pieces and find what's different about it.
Jacob and I talk about all the time, but like the best thing that I got in like any acting class or whatever was that they would make us go back, find scenes that we love, like in movies or TV shows, something that we kind of want to bring into our performances and transcribe them and try to see how that compares to how they got to the performance based off the page. And then most of the people in the class and everything turned out to want to become writers anyway, because we linked the different mediums so well. And I still look at that. I'm always like, oh, what did that look like on the page? And most stuff that you read, I've been doing coverage lately a little bit as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it's like so many different fascinating aspects about it. And also that's funny that Jacob brings that up of like, do you think it's necessary to read scripts? Because he's like, he hates doing it. And I'm sure I will hate doing it if I do it enough, but I'm kind of like, oh, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I don't think it's the most necessary thing in the world. Like in terms of like, just like, I don't think you should necessarily be sourcing out, always have a script on the go. Like I think it's more important just to read whatever you're passionate about. Like I don't know if you're a big reader at all, like in terms of novels or anything like that. I would just encourage you to read whatever you like. Like there's this great scene in like Good Will Hunting where he's like, whatever blows your hair back, like really, like literally, like, I mean, read whatever you're actually interested in. I think that's the most valuable.
In horror, idea is king. And so for you, like, I see things like Smile, like Parker Finn. I see, It Follows. There are certain combinations of title with like one sentence premise that I think is sometimes useful as far as like getting eyes on a genre thing. And so do you ever spend time like thinking of like just sitting and like thinking of what your idea is going to be, or are there certain materials you turn to that like could inspire an idea, or how do you get your ideas?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's, it's me, sitting in a ball on the floor, banging my head against the wall. But eventually you think of something. I find there's kind of two ways to do it. Like one is, like trying to think, like for me, I'm kind of very attracted to like subversive ideas, like ideas that are somehow twisting expectations at like a fundamental level. And so I like to work in genre. I was literally like, the way I came up with the idea for Patchwork, which is kind of this female Frankenstein movie, was I was literally just trying to think of like, well, what are like classic genres that we don't really see a lot of, and like Frankenstein's a pretty classic genre, but what are like the fundamental concerns about that? Like what are the themes kind of related to? And for me, like, what is the scariest thing about Frankenstein? And part of it was the thing that scared me most when I was a kid was just the idea that he's actually supposed to be a bunch of people chopped up and put together. Like, that's fucking terrifying, and like, what about that scares me? Like, and for me, it was, just being a kid with, like body dysmorphia, like the idea of not being satisfied with your body and the way you look, and like, and having that sort of like judgment. And I remember kind of like, I was thinking about it over that was kind of mulling it around in my head. And then I was hanging out with my girlfriend at the time, and she was kind of like, we were out getting a drink somewhere or something, and she had like was someone who came into the bar, and she was sort of commenting on like this girl's like hairstyle, but then like her shoes, and then like her fingernails, and then like it was like a number of like little details that were like, it was like they were kind of like complimentary but also kind of judgy, like, and I remember being like, huh. And that kind of just percolated in my head, and then I eventually kind of hit me like, oh, what if I do like a female Frankenstein that at the heart of it is really about body identity issues, and then that kind of started, mixing with other ideas that I had about, like being attracted to like the premise of like something like The Hangover, like where you're sort of doing like a bit of a mystery, or something like Old Boy, where you're kind of like, like a revenge movie, kind of killing your way to the top. And that's, backed their way into this plot of Patchwork, where you essentially have somebody who wakes up and is stitched together and needs to figure out, who did this to them, and I think that's, it's not rocket science, but like it's hard to force, you kind of have to think about things extremely,
in depth.
in a very detailed way. It's whatever's meaningful to you, and then just kind of forget about it and go about your life. And then it'll sort of like, splash in your face like a bucket of water. And that's like, where inspiration comes from. And sometimes you don't even know what's happening. I'll also be driving around and be like, oh shit, that's a great idea. Like, and that happens too. Like that happened with me when I was doing this script called Nightlight. That was one of our kind of first big sales. Is I was literally just like doing a lot of thinking about like nostalgia and like things that kind of scared me, and about like, like at the time I was kind of going through some stuff with my dad. I was thinking about stuff like that, and it just kind of all just eventually I was just like at a stoplight. I was like, holy shit, that's a great idea, like, or whatever. And so it I don't really have any great like roadmaps for it, but I find you just chase whatever you are interested in at the moment, and then it'll pay off at some point.
I love you're saying like it's what you're scared of, because that's so truthful. And if you're really terrified of something and then you just execute on it right, people are also going to be terrified of that. And at the end of the day, like that's what you want to do with the genre stuff. So that's cool to hear. Are you still writing specs at this point?
Yeah. I mean, was quite literally writing a spec right before I hopped on this call. I mean, we write specs. I mean, myself, and by me, I mean myself and my writing partner Chris. We write a lot of specs together, and then we write them kind of individually. I think you have to write specs, just for practice, but also to sell, because the spec market is very tough and very unpredictable. But they're always, if they turn out well, they're great as samples, they're great as conversation starters, they're great as like you met somebody at a festival, here, take a look at something I wrote, and like maybe they might not like it, they might like it, they might think this is similar to something that they have that they want to develop. There's a million reasons to do it, and the biggest one for me is just that it helps keep your the demons at bay.
For sure. I agree. Sometimes you have to do it. Do you feel like if you have some specs in your back pocket that you're really proud of, what do you feel like is the next best step? Is it doing the festival run? Is it trying to find management? Like, is there a certain thing that you would suggest?
For you, or just in general?
Well, I mean, yeah, mostly for you, but also like people are going through that as far as like, starting out filmmakers or writers or whatever, and they feel like they're like, okay, I have this script that I love. Like now, kind of, what do I do?
I mean, like the interesting thing about reps is like there's kind of this dual system right now where like managers will come on kind of early, and they will be interested in people who have no sort of earning potential, and then they can kind of get on the ground floor with and kind of steer them towards what might be the best path forward. Whereas can you give me a second here? Sorry, I just got it.
100%.
Sorry, just one second.
Yeah, but that's fascinating, bro. The hearing from his perspective that like he's writing and he's still writing specs. I'm just saying that's like, and it surprises me too how rare it is hearing people who are like who are in your position, who are not writing specs, who feel like they're at a certain place and they feel like they don't have to write specs. I know for a fact, at least for me, and mostly just to keep the demons at bay, I will always have to be writing specs,
Yeah. I mean, people like, I don't know, like, people are like, oh, you're writing a spec, it's for free, but that's actually the best way to keep control of your project, I mean, really, I mean, if you're lucky enough to write a spec and then sell it, it's like the amount of money is worth the 5 specs that you wrote before that, like it really is. And so it's like, I don't think there's any reason not to do it, it's just quite like I would write more specs if I had more free time, that's probably where I would put the time, because it's just another bullet in the chamber. And it's also a way to kind of take an idea for a walk. Right. That might not be it's a way to date an idea without marrying it, it really is.
Yep.
And so, I would encourage you, like, if someone's goal is to become like a filmmaker that's kind of like a main kind of creative part of the process, if they've been developing like those sort of writing chops and kind of like are on that path, I would encourage them to raise as many specs as possible. But whereas like whereas like somebody like yourself who's been like making things like so prolifically, it might be, the best path forward might be to try and find that long form thing, either writing it yourself or if you think it'll be strong enough, or sourcing that idea from a writer that you think might be better than you. I'd be honest, like there's so many writers that are way better than me, and I would love to direct their scripts. But it's a question of finding that thing you connect with. And so then if you're lucky enough to find like a piece of material that you would be as passionate about making that you think you could bring your point of view to. Like it seems to me like you put a lot of resources into like you're just making a lot of stuff, and I mean that in the best way. Like as in like you're really kind of churning them out in a way that I think you can't help but learn from. And you're also servicing a very specific audience that is also the same audience for the features. So I would encourage you to either, if you have an idea that you think is the right scale, that you can really do that right type of damage, that you don't have to, you're putting yourself in a position that one of my favorite movies from the last 10 years is a movie called The Dirties, which is a fellow Canadian filmmaker guy named Matt Johnson made it, and it's like a gem, and it's like it won Slam Dance, in 2014 or something. Yeah. And it's this he kind of used to say this thing, like, you put yourself in a position where you don't have to dig too deep to find the gold, and I mean that as in like, look at your body of work and really be honest about like, what are the moments that work about this, right, and then run towards that, and for me, like, that sweet spot was ideas that were just a little off kilter, that were like jokes in a part that was supposed to be off-putting, and you kind of try and create a scenario where you can show that off.
Totally. My last question, because we're running out of time, and then I'll give the stage to Duke. But I'm curious as to, when you write a spec, when is the point that you feel like it's finished? Because obviously, you can be super prolific. You can, and a lot of writers, myself included, are guilty of kind of putting your nose to the grindstone and kind of like grinding out a script, and you've got the 90 pages, but like, is it really there? What's your process for, like, you finish a spec, you get that first draft out, and then what's like the revising stage look like, where you're at the point where you feel like it's ready?
Yeah, I mean, we usually write a first draft, and we actually do like a kind of a work in process table read early, which is kind of unusual, not super common. But we usually, like, our first or second draft, we'll get together, usually a couple of actor friends and then other writers, and do like a literal table read, and then you can kind of see the whole thing as an entity, over 2 hours or less. And you kind of, it'll really show you where the problems are, a lot of the time. Like, and you have walked to those things being, that's either it's a mess or it's generally working. You might want to work on these things, and you get a bunch of notes, and then you address those notes, and that's usually when I show it to my reps. And then I kind of have a team of reps now that like, once they've kind of had their say, and we've kind of implemented the elements that we like of those notes, then that's about the time it's ready to go out.
That makes revision so much more fun, having an actual table read and then putting those notes in play and then taking it to your reps. I love that process. That's cool. Yeah. Do you have anything you want to wrap this up with? Any last final burning questions for Tyler?
I don't think any really more questions for me, but this is so educational, and really love just getting this is exactly what we would love in this podcast. I don't know if Jake told you this, but you're a second guest so far.
Hey, I'm happy to be the tip of the sword,
And truly, this is like literally just like giving insight to someone who, you're accomplished, yet you're humble enough to like constantly be working at different angles, writing specs, always kind of like dipping your toes into different stuff, irons in the fire, as you said. That's like exactly, Jacob, in my alley. That's what it's all about. So really cool to listen to.
It really means the world to me, everything that you've already done. I mean, like you said, like, we've only known each other a short time, but already, I'm so grateful for just our conversations, going to Beyond Fest, having that experience, and just, hearing from you, your process, and like digging into it like that, it's such a specific space that I'm in, that we're in, that like, you know, there is very specific ambitions that I want to go after. And so to be able to talk to someone like you and hear your perspective on things, and it's invaluable. So I really
happy to help any way I can, man. Just, let me know. I'm a text away.
awesome, man. Appreciate you.
Let's all talk again sometime in the future, man. This is great.
Yeah, look forward to it. Thanks so much for having me on, guys.
Thank you, man. We'll be in touch.